Hello, everyone. We're going to just give it a couple of seconds to make sure that we have everybody logging in. We have all our panelists ready, but I do want to make sure that the participants get to hear everything in the webinar. So please bear with us for a minute. Okay, I've got a minute after 3, so in order to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody. I'm Paz Ardasa Regan. I am program manager here at Catholic Climate Covenant, and I give you a warm welcome. Hopefully you're all here to listen and learn on this webinar called How to Engage Our Church Leaders for Climate Action. We are hoping that you will walk away with knowledge about how to faithfully and positively engage your Catholic leader, be it your priest, your bishop, a diocesan staff person, an institutional leader, how to engage them to take action on climate change. We are going to give you skills, key skills, simple engagement resources that you can use, handouts that you can take with you and share with folks, all couched in the action that we have for everybody during this season of creation. We always get started with a prayer. So if you would join with me, remembering that we are always in the presence of God, even during these webinar moments. This is the opening prayer from the 2021 Feast of St. Francis program, which we have used with permission from Catholic Earth Care Australia. This was a prayer that they created in 2002 when they first launched Catholic Earth Care. It's a prayer for ecological conversion. God of the sun and the moon, of the mountains, deserts, and plains, God of the mighty oceans, of rivers, lakes, and streams, God of all creatures that live in seas and fly in the air, of every living thing that grows and moves on this sacred earth. We are formed by Christ into your people, called to bring the world into your marvelous light. As the body of Christ, we are messengers of ecological vocation. We are entrusted with caring for this earth which you have created. Help us to love it, respect it, to repair what we have damaged, to care for what you have made good and holy. Give us the wisdom and the passion to change our minds, hearts, and our ways. Let us be mustard seeds in our world, bringing about ecological conversion, which spreads to every corner of the earth. For our sake now and for every generation which is to come. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. A little housekeeping that we always let you know about. We are recording the webinar, and the link to the webinar recording and to the resources that you will be talking to you about today will be sent to you within the next 24, maximum 48 hours, most likely tomorrow afternoon. There are 2 boxes that you can use. One is a Q&A box and one is the chat box. For questions, please use the Q&A box. And if you know which panelist the question is for, please put their name. The chat box can be used if you need to chat with me or chat with each other, but the questions should go in the Q&A box. We've got a great group of panelists today. We've got Catholic Climate Covenant staff, as well as Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. And I will be introducing them as each of them speaks. Let us get started. At this point, I will stop sharing because the first person to start us off is Anna Robertson. And Anna is the Covenant's Director of Youth and Young Adult Mobilization. Anna, could you give the webinar participants the background of why we decided to provide this training, the overview of what the ask is that we are asking Catholics during the season of creation, and why youth and young adults particularly are called to respond on this ask, and give that background. Anna, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Paz. I'm delighted to be here today and to get us started. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea of keystone species. Now, in ecology, keystone species serve as a kind of backbone in their respective ecosystems, maintaining balance and contributing to biodiversity. So their absence, therefore, threatens the vitality of the entire ecosystem in significant ways. So examples of keystone species include salmon in the Puget Sound region where I live, the famed wolves of Yellowstone, and oak trees throughout North America. So I'm going to begin today sharing the voice of a fellow young adult, Anna Johnson. And Anna Johnson, in her remarks at the Youth and Young Adult session of the Laudato Si conference, suggested that the church is like a keystone species in the fight for God's creation. She said, quote, "We are seeing right now what happens when the church's voice is absent. Species are going extinct. We're facing massive heat waves and horrific storms, and because of human action. With the reintroduction of the collective church voice calling for action, God's creation can again flourish," end quote. So there's hardly been a more critical time for the church to step into the fullness of its potential as an advocate for the earth and its most vulnerable inhabitants. According to a recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is no longer a future possibility. It's a present reality, and our real-time actions as a human family will determine the scope and the scale of the suffering that it ushers in. Not in some distant future, but indeed in my lifetime, speaking to you today as a 30-year-old who hopes for many more years of vibrant and full life. We need look no further than the hurricane-battered Louisiana coast, the recently flooded hills of Middle Tennessee, or the burning and burnt US West for signs of the times. So at Catholic Climate Covenant, together with our partner organizations, we've developed an initiative focusing on advocating the administration and Congress, especially ahead of COP26, calling for bold and just actions beyond partisanship that drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consistently prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable. This initiative takes the form of both a petition for individuals and a sign-on letter for institutions. In today's webinar, we'll be focusing on equipping you all with the skills to grow in your advocacy as protagonists in the fight for God's creation. Specifically, we'll be sharing what we can learn from tried and true advocacy strategies as we voice our concerns for creation to leaders in our church. We hope that you'll take these skills forward as you invite church leaders into the prophetic and holy work of creation care, specifically by inviting them to support the Catholic Climate Action Letter for institutions and corresponding petition for individuals. I want to take a moment now to speak directly to my fellow young people. Throughout my life, I can recall hearing people tell me that as a young person, I have more power than I think. But it wasn't until I began my work developing our youth and young adult mobilization efforts at Catholic Climate Covenant that the truth of this statement really clicked for me. And it was reaffirmed when, during the Q&A following his keynote at the Laudato Si conference, Cardinal Blaise Cupich said as much, and I quote, "You have much more power than you really think, young people. Don't overlook or underplay your abilities," end quote. This affirmation came at the tail end of an invitation in which he encouraged young people to seek out dialogue about climate change with their pastors. Here, he echoed a similar invitation made a few months prior by Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, president of the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, who encouraged young people to talk to their bishops about their environmental concerns, much as they might bring their concerns of their hearts to their grandfathers. We have an opportunity now to be the church that we want to see in the world. In the words of Emily Burke, another young adult leader at the Laudato Si conference and a current environmental sociology doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin, I still believe the US Catholic Church can enact Laudato Si in ways commensurate with the climate crisis. Here, young people may actually need to help lead the church. So today you'll learn about opportunities to activate your parishes and your dioceses for integral, just, and fierce care for creation, the very creation that sustains us, that's setting the stage for our every joy and heartbreak, of which we are an inseparable part. We'll share a form later in the training that anyone on this call can fill out to share your openness to joining this effort to engage church leaders in dialogue about climate action. And in the form, you'll have the opportunity to indicate if you're a young person under the age of 39. Even if you're not sure where to begin, fill out that form. If you're a young person, check that box, and we'll be with you every step of the way as we learn together how to live our vocation as courageous stewards and co-creators. Now, with gratitude for all the generations on this call, bringing unique and crucial gifts, as well as our ancestors on whose shoulders we stand and the future generations who will one day stand on ours, I turn the mic back over to Paz.
Thank you, Anna, and wonderful introduction. As the mother of those young people that you're talking about, I hear it and I will pass it on to them. Chris Kerr will be our next panelist. Chris is the executive director of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, which is one of the Covenant's most active partners. And he was going to address, why do Catholics advocate and how effective face-to-face meetings can be? Because the ISN has really mastered that strategy of face-to-face meetings, especially with youth and young adults in the Jesuit network. Chris, you can share your screen and present, please.
Great, thanks, Paz. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this today. Let's just get the slides going there. As Paz said, my name is Chris Kerr. I'm the executive director of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, a lay organization that works in the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and consequently works a lot with the Jesuit network, but also with the larger church. I'm so grateful to be part of this today. And Anna, thank you for your opening remarks. And I wanted to first address this question of why, as Catholics, do we advocate, whether advocating to policymakers or advocating even within our own church community for the building of more just and sustainable communities. And I think that answer comes initially from this quote from St. John Paul II, that we are people of solidarity, and that solidarity is not just some big kind of idea up in our heads, but it comes through in a determination to be committed to the common good, and that we have to respond to that not only as a community but also as individuals, and that this is a responsibility we have as people of faith, as Catholics. I also think of this quote from Laudato Si, talking about the idea of young people. Anna was kind of sharing the perspective of and a message to young people, and I think of young folks like Anna actually shared this idea of demanding change in the context of how we care for creation. And so I think we have a responsibility to future generations as people of faith. We believe in the continued kind of presence of life, of God's gift of life here on our earth. And so we have a responsibility to future generations to ensure that this earth, this common home, is well cared for as we move forward in time. So these are just a couple big ideas, but also in our work at the Ignatian Solidarity Network, we use the pastoral circle as a way of thinking about how we get to the point of advocating. Okay, this idea that we have experiences in life that help us to understand the complexities of the world, the complexities of how our earth is mistreated, how that impacts the poor and vulnerable. We take those experiences and we start to look at them, to analyze them, to understand kind of the intellectual part of it, to think about what are the impacts of our decisions as consumers, the impacts of our decisions as drivers of cars or owners of homes, and on an institutional level, what does it mean to heat or cool a church or a school building or a hospital, all these different elements, right? And then we apply our faith. We apply the values of Catholic social teaching rooted in the Gospels to think about how we move forward. And that movement forward brings us to a responsive action. And that can come in the form of, certainly in the form of direct service and charity, but also in the form of advocacy to try to change structures that are either unjust or unsustainable for the care of this earth, right? And then we evaluate the effectiveness and the impact of that advocacy, and we apply that as we move forward into that next life experience. And so we're always living this pastoral circle, whether or not we're engaging in the social analysis, the reflection rooted in faith, and the action is really a kind of a challenge for us. But it's something that we need to think about how we're making sure that those three stages are an integral part of who we are as people of faith. Now, advocacy fits into kind of a larger framework of how we can create social change, right? So in this kind of layout or chart schematic here, you kind of see different ways that we can have influence. And this can be applied, this was kind of created for a broad range of advocacy and social change making that we can have, but this can be applied within the context of the church as well. The church is a large institution, right? So it's kind of a biosphere, no pun intended, on its own, right? So the ways that we can influence it, both on a local, a regional, and a national, and certainly even an international level, the application of this is the same. So we can kind of see, in the lower left-hand corner, the idea of public education and the impact it can have. And then as we kind of move our way up and across the chart, we can see kind of more intensive ways of trying to elicit change. You see up towards the top, things that really get into intensive policy change. And certainly that happens on a governmental level, local, state, national, but it also can happen within Catholic institutions and how we operate as institutions. What are the systems within our institutions that can either build a more just, a more sustainable community, or can perpetuate injustice and unsustainability? So it's important to think about this even within the realm of our advocacy within the church. When we talk about advocacy and the basic elements of what we're doing, we're always thinking about the realities of the people we're most concerned about, particularly those who are economically poor or who are vulnerable in some way. It's critical we think about who holds power to respond to those concerns, okay? When we, if we think about something like the minimum wage in our state, we would think about the state legislature or the governor or something like that. Within the church, we need to think about who holds power within our church. Where can change happen, right? And then it gets to that point. What are the ways that change can happen? What are the ways that we need to change the policies or structures to be more effective at accomplishing our goal? What are the most effective methods to express our concerns? Anna gave a great example of a way we can respond. I know we're going to talk about that later, so I won't go too deep on that. And then how do you sustain a dialogue until change takes place? And that's really critical. That word dialogue is a really critical idea. Any type of advocacy we engage in, our goal should be to think about how we sustain to make that change. But I also like to think about how do we sustain dialogue and relationship to make long-term changes, because the reality of our world is it's always evolving. So whether we're trying to change policy around issues of climate or migration or whatever the topic is, we need to be prepared to be in relationship with power holders and policymakers over the long term. Very few issues are a one and done sort of situation. This chart, this is on a kind of on a political level, but what I wanted to share in this is this kind of shows you the impact of one type of advocacy, in-person visits, that people might make to a federal legislator, a senator, or representative, and the impact it has on the policymaker and the decisions they make in Washington, D.C. And while our conversation today isn't necessarily about federal policymakers, the concepts are still the same. The most impactful way that we can influence leaders within our church is by engaging them as most directly as possible. Not in confrontational ways, but in ways that create dialogue about the needs that exist related to the condition of our earth, and the ways the church can be not just an active participant, but a leader in responding in society. And I always love this stat. It comes from the Congressional Management Foundation that did some analysis of what are the things that are most impactful for staffers and Congress people, and it's in-person advocacy visits. So it's just kind of a plug for any way that we can engage leaders, change makers in the church as directly as possible is really valuable. And the one last thing I'll say on this: sometimes when you seek to engage a policymaker or a change maker in dialogue, sometimes they say no initially, and that's okay. Just the invitation is a critical part of the process, and just the idea that someone has been asked can give them pause to say, this must be important, that people are trying to have a meeting with me, or people are contacting me about this. And maybe they don't say yes, or maybe they don't engage in a lot of dialogue that first time, but it's a critical step in building a sense of the importance of the issues that we're bringing to the table in the work that we're doing. And I just want to share a few pictures of some of the young people we work with, since Anna was talking about the impact of young people. These were some students from one of the Cristo Rey Network schools on the East Coast who were visiting legislators on Capitol Hill a few years ago. And this was another group from a high school in Colorado. And then this group actually got to meet with former Senator Jeff Flake to talk with him about immigration policy. And this was very impactful because they brought people directly impacted by immigration policy to the table right there, literally to the table, to talk about it. And I know from learning from people who know Senator Flake that it was impactful to meet those folks today. So I'll just make a really quick plug for one tool that we have for advocacy training. It could be applied in a church context just as well as in a governmental context, but it's a kind of an Ignatian pedagogical rooted guide for advocacy. And if you're into it, you can actually scan that little code with your phone and pull that guide up. So I'll end things there and turn it back over to Paz.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for making that comment about how many of these skills that are used for advocating to legislative leaders can be translated as how we advocate to church leaders. They're kind of like the same type of folks. Next, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Dan DiLeo. Dan is associate professor and director of the program of Justice Studies and Peace at Creighton University, and Catholic Climate Covenant consultant, or as we like to call him, the resident theologian. He is going to help unpack the resources that we have available to you right now that is called Encounter for Climate Action, Steps and Resources for Engaging Your Catholic Leader. So he's going to take it from where Chris left it and really focus it on how do we connect with our Catholic leaders. Go ahead, Dan.
All right, well, thank you, Paz, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to pick up both conceptually, but also practically from where Chris left it, because the resource that we've developed to help folks engage this climate action letter is really rooted in that 101 advocacy guide that Chris mentioned. So we'll talk more about that here today. As Anna said, as part of an expression of the fullness of our Catholic faith, the Covenant and 11 of our partners have initiated this climate action letter for Catholic institutions. And so this will demonstrate broad U.S. Catholic support for a strong and just agreement at the 26th UN climate conference in November that Pope Francis will be attending. The resource that we'll be talking about today is this Encounter for Climate Action, Steps and Resources for Engaging Your Catholic Leader. You can see the link here down at the bottom, and so if you want to pull that up, you can follow along. But what I want to do is unpack this and give folks kind of a sense of what we've developed really as an evidence-based method to engage power for change. And I've capitalized both method and power because those are two of the things that Chris talked about in his presentation as necessary to affecting change, engaging power, engaging persons who have the capacity to affect change. In this case, we'll be talking not externally to the church, but inside the church, and using evidence-based methods, namely one-on-one encounters or encounters with groups and persons. As Anna said, this initiative is really a response to calls from both Cardinal Hallerak and Cardinal Cupich for Catholics to meet with their bishop about climate change that we've heard about over the summer. This builds a culture of encounter that Pope Francis has stressed in his encyclical Evangelii Gaudium. And this call for encounter that has been, that come from both Cardinal Hallerak and Cardinal Cupich has been covered in National Catholic Reporter, among other places. And so if you're interested in learning more about what the cardinals have had to say in terms of encouraging Catholics to meet with their bishop about climate change, you can follow that here. So we've developed this resource. We've tried to develop an evidence-based strategy. This will not work without the action of the people on this webinar today, listening to the recording later on. This can't sit on our website. This can't just sit on social media. This is an action-based initiative. We want to recognize that meeting with a Catholic leader may be new for you. Maybe you've never met with your bishop. Maybe you've never met with your priest or your institutional president. It may be uncomfortable. This will also take time and energy. This type of action requires more than just sending an email or posting on social media. This requires the time and energy intensive work of cultivating authentic encounter that can inspire the kind of authentic ecological conversion that Francis talks about in Laudato Si. So this is not easy, but it's essential in terms of both evidence-based methods, but also the fullness of our Catholic faith. So this is essential to maximizing Catholic support for prudent climate policy that faithfully responds to both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. As a way of kind of structuring the conversation, this is the 8 steps in this resource guide, this Encounter for Climate Action. As you can see, we've tried to create a resource that will walk people through step by step and give them the complementary resources and appendices to actually do this step by step. Again, we recognize that this may be new. We recognize this isn't necessarily easy. So we've tried to equip people every step along the way. And so I want to walk through each of these steps and give you kind of an orienting sense about what this entails and what this looks like. Our first step is, as Anna mentioned, and the link is in the chat, we're asking people to register their openness to convene what we're calling delegations. And so we're going to ask you to complete a brief form so that we can connect with you and we can help you connect with others, especially if you're thinking about doing this in your diocese in response to the call of Cardinals Hallerak and Cupich. We want to be able to connect people. And so if you follow this link here, you'll be taken to this pre-engagement interest form. So we're asking people to register their interest so that we can accompany folks along the way. The second step is to identify others. Most important thing you can do is go get others. That's part of the power and the efficacy of this strategy. It's not just individuals, it's groups demonstrating a shared commitment. And so we're first asking people to identify 5 to 10 other Catholics in their community who are committed to creation care, climate justice, and the fullness of Catholic social teaching. And so when we think about this kind of asset mapping, if you will, there are lots of ways to identify people in your diocese. Again, for example, if that's your locus of influence that you're looking at. So you can contact the Covenant to see if there are creation care teams, see if there are other partners that we're aware of in your particular diocese. You might also take steps like reaching out to social justice ministers, staff in the diocese, parishes, with with people who are committed to this work, consider reaching out especially to youth and young adult ministries in the parish or the diocese. As we've heard, young people have a powerful voice in this work. You might also do things like explore area Catholic college and university and high school websites for different persons, but also initiatives that are going on. So you might look for teachers offering courses in Catholic social teaching, offices and directors of sustainability, centers for service and justice, or student environmental clubs. So these are some of the places that you might look in terms of a structural assessment of what's in your area. You might also look at local communities of women and men religious. As we heard at the conference here a couple of months ago, women religious especially have been at the forefront of this for decades. So identify others. Who might you bring together with you to meet with your leader? The third step is then actually to invite people. So you've identified people. Once you've identified 5 or 10 Catholics, you need to invite them. And so we're recommending contacting people with an email that outlines your plans. And again, here we're trying to equip people with very practical resources. And so in the first appendix in this resource, we've provided a sample invitation email to potential delegation members. So this is something that you could, if you wanted to, just copy and paste into an email and send to folks. But this outlines what is this initiative, this letter initiative, what is this strategy to try and engage leaders personally to set up meetings. So this is a resource to invite others into the conversation and to join you. The next step in this whole process is to try and schedule a meeting. And our hope is that you'll be able to schedule a meeting with your leader sometime during the season of creation, which runs from September 1st through October 4th. So tomorrow through the Feast of St. Francis on October 4th. The thinking here, the reason for this window, not only is it tied to the season of creation, but we're asking institutions, Catholic institutions, dioceses, parishes, colleges, hospitals to sign the letter by Monday, October 25th, in order for the Covenant and our partners to deliver this ahead of the UN meeting, which begins November 1st. And that's the meeting, again, that Pope Francis will be attending, encouraging an international climate agreement. So we're hoping that folks will meet with your leader before the Feast of St. Francis on October 4th, and that'll give enough time for discernment among leaders to be able to commit and sign the letter. There are lots of ways to try and go about this, and we're focusing specifically on the diocesan structure. If you're trying to meet with your bishop, a key step here is to identify the correct contact person by searching the diocese website. Every website is different, but most websites for a diocese have something like an Office of the Bishop page. There's a diocesan directory, which may have the emails for the bishop's staff or the diocesan chancellor. So the key here is to identify who's able to set up a meeting. If you're not able to locate the appropriate contact on the website, we would encourage you to call the diocesan main line and ask for the email of whomever can schedule a meeting with the bishop or some other leader if you're working outside the diocesan structure. Once you've identified that person, the next step is email them and set up a meeting. And so again, here we've tried to equip folks with resources as easy as possible. And so in Appendix 2 of this resource, we've provided a sample email to request a meeting with your Catholic leader. And so again, we've tried to provide the background in terms of this letter initiative, the background for Catholic teaching on climate change. And so you've got this text here as a way to support that outreach to try and schedule a meeting. You may not get a response. And so step 5 here is contingent, follow up by phone if necessary. So if you don't get an email response within 3 business days, which is pretty standard in terms of a response time, call the person you emailed to confirm receipt of the email. They may not have gotten it. Leave a voicemail if you have to and ask that the person return your call. If you don't get an email or a phone response within 24 hours of leaving a voicemail, you might at that point have another member of your group call. So you might have somebody else call that very same person and say, I'm following up and I want to just make sure you got the email and we'd like to set up a meeting with the leader. At this point, you might also go back to step 4 and identify somebody else within the institution who might be able to set up a meeting with your leader. So follow up as necessary in terms of trying to get a meeting. Once you've got a meeting scheduled with the bishop or the other leader, next step we're encouraging, again, informed especially by the Ignatian Advocacy 101 resource Chris mentioned, is to gather delegation members for a preparatory meeting. You've got to be able to plan all of this ahead of time in order to maximize the efficiency and the efficacy of your meeting. And so here again, we've developed a resource to try and help and equip folks to do this. So Appendix 3 of this resource provides a meeting agenda preparation outline. And I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but here you can see we're trying to go through step by step. What are the different components of a successful meeting with a leader, and what are all the things that people need to be prepared for ahead of time. And you'll see, again, using ISN's resource, we've identified different responsibilities for group members. So one person will, for example, be a facilitator, a note taker. We've got one person, or at least one person, is identified as a narrator, their personal experience about why faith-based action for climate change is important to them. And that's something that Elena will develop here in a few more minutes. We've also, in step 7 here, if you can kind of squint and see, we've got contingent responses. So if the leader says yes, if the leader says maybe, if the leader says no to signing the letter, we've identified some follow-up actions that you might take. And so again, this is really kind of the pillar of this particular initiative, this meeting. And so that leads into step 7, which is actually implementing the meeting agenda. So you and your group have taken the time to prepare. The next step in step 7 is actually facilitating the meeting. And we've got, again, lots of resources. The Leave Behind resource provides talking points and things like that. So again, we're trying to equip people as best we're able to set them up for success and make this as easy as possible, because it is, again, we know it's difficult. This isn't just send an email. The last step then is to debrief and follow up. And here again, drawing from ISN's resource, we've identified a few different post-meeting actions. And so immediately after the meeting, we would encourage you to review as a group what you heard, and to delegate responsibility. So choose someone to send a thank you email to the leader, identify next action steps, and identify and assign point persons for each. And so that needs to be done right away, so it's still fresh of mind. Within 2 days, we're asking people to complete the form here at this website to share your experience. So just like we asked you to do a pre-survey before you've done all of this, we're asking you to do a post survey and tell us how it went. Were you able to get a meeting? Did the meeting go well? Was the leader willing to sign the letter or not? And to give us a little bit of background in terms of next steps you anticipate or hope to take moving forward. And then within a week of your meeting, send a thank you up email to the leader, attach any discussion materials, or answer any questions that maybe in the moment during the meeting you weren't able to address or answer. And if the leader didn't agree to sign the letter, restate your ask. Again, this is what we're asking. This is why we're asking. Please let us know if we can support your discernment in any way. So again, this is the resource that we've developed at the Covenant to try and equip and empower people to really collect the signatures that are needed around the climate action letter to demonstrate the broad U.S. Catholic support for a strong and just climate agreement at the November COP26 climate meeting. So with that, I will turn things back over to Paz, who can then help facilitate with Elena how to actually compellingly tell your story, because that's going to be a key aspect of the meeting itself. So I will turn things back over to Paz.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Dan, when you have a chance, can you go into the chat and rewrite the link of where folks can get this resource?
Sure.
There's lots of those questions.
Yep.
And they will also get the link with the recording tomorrow. So if you don't get it in the chat, you will receive it in an email tomorrow. So don't worry, folks, if you did not get it. So now we're going to move to Elena. And I am going to share my screen and hopefully get to the part. So Elena Gaona is the Director of Communications at Catholic Climate Covenant. And she is going to give us this really incredible, I looked at her slides and her resources, and I was like, wow, this is going to be extremely helpful. It's going to be a mini training on telling your story that can be used in multiple settings. Absolutely, it can be used when you meet with your Catholic leader. It can be used when you meet with anybody or you're trying to convince somebody in a way that personalizes the issue you're talking about. So Elena, I'm going to go ahead and move the slides. Just let me know.
Great, thank you, Paz. And yeah, I'm trying to pack it in a lot, so I'll talk pretty quickly, and it's recorded, so you can always go back. So thank you. We're gonna start with sharing your story, and we'll go to the next slide. So the power of a story is connection. Those who tell the stories rule the world. It's a proverb attributed to the Hopi Indians. Why do we tell stories? Well, a story can help a person see things in an entirely new way. We can forge new relationships and strengthen the ones we already have. You can change a law, inspire a movement, make people care about something that they had maybe never thought about before. Stories make us human and help us connect to each other. Next slide. I wanted to share a couple of examples. Here's a story in the Washington Post of Black families who once lived off their southern farmland, and many families have lost their farms. There's a bill now it's Black Farmers Bill to try to forgive their debts so that Black farmers can get loans and keep their farms. And the coalition behind this said that Cory Booker said he signed on to the bill specifically because he read the story about the farmers in the Washington Post. Another example is in the 2019 Laudato Si and the U.S. Catholic Church Conference, Father John Grace, who's pictured here on our website, shared about why he went solar at his parish. And we were lucky enough to talk to the editor of National Catholic Reporter for this year's conference. And he said that the stories that Father John Grace shared were still what stuck in his mind 2 years later, and also helps inspire why NCR does such a good job covering these issues. So, just the power of one story and a compelling figure. Another one, a very personal story that came out in WAMU yesterday. It was my daughter's first day of school, and she got quoted in the article. So you see these stories every year, right? First day of school, but how do you make them personal? You always need that little person. So my daughter said, "I'm excited to make friends and excited to learn new things," declared Fabiola Rushing, an 8-year-old who is starting 3rd grade. Fabiola had laid out all her outfits for the week, settling on a new pair of leggings with colorful shapes and a t-shirt with the school's logo for the first day. So you capture in that little moment a child's excitement about the first day and why families like ours are risking sending our kids to school because these kids need this. And I know that people will remember what she said. So where do I start? Your life story is what do you tell yourself and others about you versus a personal narrative, which is what we would share most often in settings like this. Is what is a personal narrative? It's a story, it's personal about you, and it's narrative telling a story. So a story about a moment or event in your life. It's not your life story. That said, it's really, I think, the most fun personally and also big picture to get in touch with your personal story. Because to get to the personal narrative where we share about our lives, memories, and feelings, it's a true story about you. So you may enjoy or need to start that narrative by looking at the big picture. So that's why I'm taking it back a little to say, again, where do you start? We have trouble deciding what to write about. But one little technique, and there's a bunch of techniques here, and this is one of the handouts. There's other handouts, and we'll share the link where these handouts are. But like a lot of us are visual, so how do you decide what to write about? One way is to create a heart map. Show all the things about you that you love and that are important to you. And each section of this has a map. So it's just kind of a way to graph out your feelings and your emotions. So later today or this week, you can do this, graph out your feelings. One really great tool that you can go to, iamfromproject.com, is this poem written by George L. Lyon. And I'll just read you the first line. If you go to that website, iamfromproject.com, you can hear the author actually read it, and you can get all the resources that they have for how you can write your own poem. We did this in a recent DEI training that we had, and it just kind of really personalizes. I am from clothespins, from Clorox and carbon tetrachloride. I am from the dirt under the back porch. Black, glistening, it tasted like beets. I am from the forsythia bush, the Dutch elm, whose long gone limbs I remember as if they were my own. So, in a beautiful way, you're telling yourself your story about yourself and grounding yourself. I know mine always, when I do this, it always includes the magnolia tree behind my parents' house in Dallas. So, how do I write a personal narrative? Well, you've grounded yourself and you write about yourself. The emphasis should be on something you have experienced personally, a small moment. Don't try to write about a giant topic or even like a chronological list of events necessarily. It's a moment. Tell the story from your point of view and write the same way you would tell the story to someone. Make sure your narrative has a beginning, middle, and end. One arc that works really well for as far as elements of a narrative is problem, solution, action. When I do media training, I tell this a lot to people who are being interviewed by reporters. What's the problem? What's the solution? What is your call to action for folks? And it helps you also, like in those bullets, kind of tell the story. There's a worksheet for this one. These are just some questions to ask yourself to kind of, again, get your juices flowing. Like, what do you want people to take away after they hear this story? And so I won't read all of these, but the worksheet is there. Another way is to graphically organize this. Kind of is like the heart map. Like, what are the, but this goes more than to your heart. This is like the elements of the story. Is it going to be the beginning in education? Then you're calling for action. You're telling what it was that was emotional for you. So when you look at these circles, it's more like the elements of the story versus the elements of what's going on with you inside your heart. Another thing, and going back to the story of my daughter, it was a small moment. So you round out all those details, and the more details you have around it, it really frames that small moment and creates that connection with people. So you want to not overwhelm, but details, like what did you smell? What did you feel? You know, what realization? All of those details around it capture the moment that makes the connection. Moving to this graphic organizer, this is also in the handouts. This is just at the top, it gives you a list of things to consider as you're mapping out your narrative. And in a paragraph, it really guides you by the hand to tell that story. This story is about first this happened, next, then finally. A lot of times my husband and I work a lot on issues to improve the neighborhood or you know, on ecological issues. And we talk about our daughters having asthma, and we're surrounded by dust from the construction company next door. We're surrounded by exhaust fumes from the bus depot next door. It's those little stories that we tell when city leaders come and want to build a new park, you know, for their sewer system, like 2 streets down from us. We're like, we have enough of this. So those stories matter. Ways to begin a narrative. And this, I filled this out to, again, give you examples. In the handout, these are left empty so that you can kind of get prompted for what are the ways that you can begin your own narrative. An emotion or feeling, my daughters mean the world to me. An action, when my daughters play outside, they end up coughing due to asthma. A dialogue, mommy, I can't breathe. Hearing these words is always scary, and this does happen in our house. Description, the dust particles from the construction company near our house fill our neighborhood air with bad air. And some examples of ways to end the narrative. Reflective or circular, you're coming back to either the circle of life or the circle of how you started in the movement or something. So we owe it to our children to care. We're thinking of the future. Hopes or wishes. I hope I'm able to leave a good planet for my daughters. Moral or lesson learned. Our work made the air quality improve. It can be done. Or a decision call to action. Please sign this letter for our future generations. And I'll just end by the different, once you have your story, I mean, there are so many ways to share it. Letters to the editor. Well, first, number one is in person, which is what we're talking about today. But letters to the editor, op-eds, blog posts, articles, videos, podcasts, social media. Some organizations have story banks, or you could just write them all down somewhere and keep them for yourself to have ready, because maybe you'll be nervous at the moment and you've already thought of your story. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. At this point, we're going to have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and the Covenant's Executive Director, Dan Misla, will be moderating the Q&A. Dan?
Great. Well, thank you, Paz, and all the presenters. And the staff has entrusted me with the Q&A because they couldn't trust me with anything else, I guess. But so I'm happy to do this. I'll try to answer some of the questions. Others I'll throw to some of the panelists. You know, one question was about civil disobedience. If we can't get the attention of our bishops, can we try that? And the answer is you can try anything. But I think the key here is to try to build a relationship. I think going from 0 to 60 is probably not a good idea. I think we have to understand that our bishops are very busy people. I talked to our Episcopal moderator on our board, Bishop Tyson from Yakima, pretty regularly. And I'm just astounded by the number of things that he has to juggle every day. So just remember that they are very busy people, and it may be difficult to get to them, particularly in this short time period, but we do encourage you to try. But just, know that maybe that's not the first step you take is civil disobedience, but rather, try to find a person who knows the bishop, as Dan suggested, call the chancery office to see if you can set up a meeting. You can certainly try to gather more people, as was suggested earlier. We can connect you with local creation care teams and so forth. And so I think once you get a kind of a critical mass of people asking the same question, I think the chancery office will begin to pay attention. Dan or Chris, do you want to elaborate on that at all? No? Okay.
And I was just going to say, your point about bishops are very busy, and someone I think in the chat noted that the bishop's schedule is often planned many months in advance, and I think it's really important to be conscious of this, and that they're as the kind of the shepherd of the diocese, they're being asked to keep track of a lot of different things happening across the diocese, and I think sometimes people assume because they're not hearing some proactive message on an issue or a particular area that the bishop is not interested. And I don't think that's fair. I think that, this is why we have to ask, and we have to, kind of create an opportunity for dialogue, because I think there is so much going on. And so I think it's critical to be putting out an invitation, putting out an ask, and not being discouraged just because there isn't time to meet with you this fall doesn't mean that there's not an interest. It just meant there wasn't time to meet with you this month,
And one other thing I would say as a follow-up is that you're right, this is a relatively quick turnaround that we're asking folks to take up. And that's part of the reason why in that email, that sample email that we drafted to try and request a meeting with the leader, we've included a description of this initiative and links to where the leader could go if they wanted to learn more, or maybe actually sign the letter. And so maybe it's the case that you're not able to get a meeting with the leader, but maybe an email from several people from across the diocese or the institution gets through in a way that the leader is compelled to say, yeah, I'll actually sign this. I don't need a meeting in order to be inspired to do it. So again, we've tried to be very discerning and strategic about the resources that we're providing in this document.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is that all of the bishops will receive an invitation to sign the letter. That will happen, I believe, next week. So Bishop Joseph Tyson, who's our Episcopal moderator, will send that invitation through the bishop's only email. So, I think early next week the bishops will have received that email. So then it's just a matter of calling the chancery and following up on that. So know that. Let's see, the other thing I was going to say is, while this webinar clearly has been targeted to bishops, that we'd like for you to build a relationship with your bishop, the campaign, the letters to Congress and the administration can be signed by any institution. So it could be your parish, it could be your school. If you're affiliated with a university, we would love to have the president of the university sign on behalf of the university, to sign their university or college up. If you're with a hospital system or a grade school or a high school, I mean, all of those, we would like to get as many institutions signing on to this letter as possible from around the country. Women religious institutions will, there'll be tons of them because they have been at this for a long time, but we'd like to have other institutions sign on as well. So please encourage other institutions that you're affiliated with, Catholic institutions in your diocese or in your neighborhood, to sign on as well. I think someone also had mentioned, had asked a question about, what if we can only get access to an auxiliary bishop? Not a bad idea. If you have an auxiliary in your diocese and that's the only meeting you can get, it certainly is worth the meeting, and encouraging that auxiliary to speak to the ordinary and ask that diocese to sign on. Building relationships is the key thing here. So however you can do that, whether it's through the chancellor, the Peace and Justice Director, the Catholic Charities Director, anybody in the diocese that you can think of that you may have a relationship with, go ahead and build that relationship. And ultimately we hope you'll get to the bishop, but these other relationships are equally as important. Let's see, what else? What other questions? There's been a number of questions about the cutting and pasting the chat. I'll ask our resident expert, Anna Robertson, to do that. And if no.
I do not have the capability of doing it. And I believe Paz was speaking earlier to some intentionality around.
Yeah, we don't usually allow for the chats to be saved in a webinar. We do it in meetings, but not in webinars. But if there's links in the chats, I do share those with everybody.
Okay. See, this is why the staff only trust me to do Q&A, and I've even messed that up. Other questions, concerns that people have? I'm looking here, I'm trying to see if there are other questions.
Somebody asked if this applies to Canadian bishops, and you may want to clarify that.
Yeah, so this is, this is particularly, the letter itself is particularly targeted to the administration and Congress in the United States. So that it wouldn't be helpful to have Canadian bishops weighing in on this. But the tactics, the strategies, building the relationships are always important. And we encourage you to do those.
There's also the questions about sharing who has already signed. And I believe that once we get a critical mass of signers, we will be updating that on the website.
Yeah, so go to catholicclimatecovenant.org and you'll see it there. We also have another website, godsplanet.us, where we're focusing a lot of our energy on implementing the Vatican's Laudato Si action platform. That also has this advocacy ask on it as well, so you can go there too. Okay. Paz, can I turn it back over to you?
Sure. There's a question, is there a letter for parishioners? For everybody else besides institutional leaders, there is a petition that is complementary to the letter, and that can be found in the same website. So you can either go to and in fact, I'll put it here. You can either go to God's Planet US or to the Covenant site. Look there for the petition. In the God's Planet US is under advocacy. Also in the Catholic Climate Covenant, you can find it through advocacy, but you can also find it on the homepage. And that is it. I want to thank everybody for being panelists, and especially to all of you who joined us today for this hour. Tomorrow you will be receiving the recording links that we have spoken about. If I find links in the chat that need to be shared, I will also include it in the email. So thank you, everybody, and have a great evening. Bye.